Chapter 1, Introducing Government in America. Politics and government matter. This is my goal in this class, is to teach you that you should believe that your participation in government and politics does matter. But unfortunately, most Americans are apathetic about politics and government, which means they don't really care. They don't see how it relates to them, and especially America's youth. According to the book, Americans' youth are not likely to be informed about government and politics, and they rarely participate in politics. For example, look at this graph. This is presidential election turnout rates, meaning who actually goes and votes in presidential elections by age from 1972 to 2004. As you can see, the red line is people over 65. So the older population in the United States is well over 60% of the population actually goes and votes in the elections. Whereas the green line is those under 25. This is well under 50% of this population actually goes and votes. Now, it is on the upswing, especially with the 2008 election, where many of the youth in America were interested in Obama as a candidate, but we'll see how that continues. So, it's kind of disappointing as a government teacher to think about the fact that a lot of people don't really care about politics. So, hopefully in this class you'll realize that as a, active member of a democracy, you can really make a difference in government. So, what is government? It is the institution and processes through which public policies are made through society. It's basically how our laws are made, how our rules are made, and how things get accomplished in government. But there are questions about how this should work. Mainly, how should we govern, and what should government do? Basically, it's all about how involved should government be in our lives, and that is really the heart of the debates in most political situations in our country. Governments typically do things like maintaining national defense, providing services. Services would be like welfare, healthcare, education, stuff like that. The government has to collect taxes to pay for those programs, and then they have to also socialize the young, making sure that the young is educated and prepared to participate in government, and also preserving order, such as, the police, the National Guard, things like that. So that's what government is supposed to do, but people still argue about how involved government should be. Who's in government? The main institutions of government that you need to know based on the Constitution are the legislative branch, which is Congress, who make the laws, the executive branch, which is the president, who enforces the laws and makes sure that they get implemented, and then the courts, whose job is to interpret the laws and decide if they're being administered fairly or broken. And last but not least, the bureaucracies. The bureaucracies are all the people that work within those branches to actually make government work. And then that's what's set up by the Constitution, but there are other parts of our government as well called linkage institutions that connect the people in our country to the constitutional institutions. Those are political parties, how we get people elected, elections, which is the actual systems for electing people, the news and media who inform us about what's going on in the branches and through elections and parties, and last but not least, interest groups, who are groups of people who organize to support their interests in government and try to make sure what they want becomes policy through the institutions of government. But the most important part of government is you, because without the people participating, then government doesn't really work in a democracy. So that's what we're going to look at next, is democracy. Actually, no, we're going to start with politics. Politics are the process by which we elect our government leaders and what policies they produce. So politics is getting people elected that you want to make your policies happen. And the book talks about, a good definition is who gets what, when, and how. And it's all a big competition a lot of the time in terms of whether or not you can get what you want to happen in government. And we can have politics like this because we live in a democracy. Democracy is a system of selecting policymakers and of organizing government so that policy represents and responds to the public preferences. That's very wordy. In reality, it means democracy where government where the people are in charge, where the people decide what's going to happen. So, government by the people. That's democracy. I imagine you all know that. And some components that are involved in democracy are Equality in voting. If we're going to have a traditional democracy, people should have access to voting. We need to have effective participation, meaning people actually taking part in the voting, which sometimes we struggle with in the United States. Enlightened understanding, meaning people should be informed. The media helps us with this, but not all people choose to stay informed. Citizens controlling the agenda, meaning that the people have a voice in what the important issues are. And also inclusion. People cannot be left out of the process. And I think inclusion and equality in voting are areas where our government has struggled in the past, early on when we did not allow everyone to have access to voting, but we've gotten better with that. More people have access. Now the question is effective participation. Are they actually taking advantage of that? So those are the main components of traditional democratic theory. Also important in democracy, is majority rule without infringing on minority rights. So even though we get to vote and majority rules and decides what our country does in a democracy, it doesn't mean the majority can vote to take away the rights of the minority. That was part of the problem that was happening before the civil rights movement, is that, the majority of this country was a white population who voted to take away the rights of minorities, and that was not okay. And the Supreme Court had to rule that, that was not okay. So majority rule without taking away the rights of the minority is a big part of an effective democracy. And also remember, in the United States, we have a representative democracy, meaning that we don't all directly vote on things because that would take too long. We have representatives that we elect and then they vote for us. So we live in a representative democracy, which is also known as an indirect democracy. Now, there are a couple main theories of democracy that we need to look at. You will be learning about them in the next podcast.